Scott. Welcome to the Mystical Positivist.
Wonderful to be here.
Well, great to have you, and I'm excited to hear about your career and your work. But I will begin, because this is our first conversation on the show with you, with our now standard first question, which is to invite you to cast your mind back to childhood and youth. And in so doing, point to or tell us about any particular experience or experiences that, looking back, you could say were harbingers of the direction that your life and work would take, that we'll be discussing later.
You know, no one's ever asked me that question. I've never asked myself that question. So it is interesting. Going way back, I would say, you know, I'm one of those people who doesn't have a vast memory of their childhood, just a few spots that stand out. And of course, I believe that's because those were moments of heightened awareness or reconnection to some ground awareness, rather than just the hoi polloi memories of different silly incidents. So I two connected incidences. One was, I remember having a lucid dream as a child. In other words, being aware that I was actually in a dream and thinking, oh, I can take these objects. I was probably 7 years old, something like that. Why can't I take these objects and bring them back into waking with me? I know this is a dream. This is a beautiful, whatever it was, piece of gold. And when I woke up and it wasn't there, I was a little disappointed in the nature of reality. And it was kind of an object lesson that reality is not quite as fluid as I had hoped. And another incident, similar, odd incident, I remember as a very young child, probably 5 or 6, throwing a little toy up in the air, and it never came down. I believe in my foggy memory, it might have come down a few days later. But I remember the fact that it wasn't anywhere in the vicinity. I threw it straight up. So that was another kind of shattering of the glass ceiling, literally, of my sense of reality, that maybe there's a more fluid dimension than the solid objects and experiences we're normally familiar with. So I think those things were portents of that. But if we fast forward, the real seminal awakenings for me were in around 18 years of age. You know, I was the hippie generation in the 60s. And there wasn't the same marketplace as today. There wasn't an internet, there wasn't cell phones and so on. But I did come across certain, what you could call sacred teachings, that profoundly altered my road forward, and particularly a book called In Search of the Miraculous about G.I. Gurdjieff. And that changed my entire perception of the world and reality. And it informed my entire way forward, I would say. But obviously, inherently, I was born with a questing mind. And if I show you later on my diagram of the human psyche, I'm strongly influenced by this particular, if we said we had 5 motivations in life, which I believe we do, the guru motivation, the seeking of wisdom, the seeking of understanding the basic matrix of our experience, what's going on in us and around us, that came in with me. That's part of my constitution, whether that's past life or whatever it is, that's something that came with me. So I was, in spite of my Jewish upbringing, conservative Jewish, non-religious Jewish, Toronto boy, I was always seeking for deeper meaning outside the obviously very shallow goings on of my upbringing in a suburban Toronto. So yeah, I would say those are the seminal points in my life.
Thank you.
And then, of course, the real shift began to happen when I began to meet what I would call masters, adepts, enlightened beings. Went out of my way to seek these people out. And being an extremely nonconformist, radical type of cantankerous human being, I did not want to go into orthodoxy, which is probably on a practical level, that's not a good idea. But nonetheless, you can't help yourself sometimes. So I did not want to go into Orthodox medicine, like a lot of Jewish. You're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be an accountant, or in the computer realm, as it evolved. But I wanted to go into something alternative. So I sought out healers of an unusual kind, with strange names like chiropractors and homeopaths, and seeking out these what books we could find, Idris Shah on Sufism. And whenever someone would come to town in Toronto, I would do what I call spiritual window shopping, and seeing what was there. I didn't mind being a dilettante because I just wanted to check out what my internal center of gravity, my internal sensibilities told me could be valid, could be true. And I do trust that. And I would say that through my many experiences, including especially a 3-year meditation retreat, I came to really be able to connect with that discerning wisdom, to be able to trust and to know the true from the false, in a sense, or the wheat from the chaff. I don't know if it's true or false in some objective sense, but certainly the charlatan from the sincere and actual adept. So my life has been involved with learning from such significant beings, and had the good fortune, as I say, to study with the Gurdjieff method, but then got very serious. While I was learning Arabic and Persian so that I could learn more about Sufism, I came across Tibetan Buddhism. And then again, that radically changed my life in a profound way, because even now, but at that time, you could actually meet people who were completely evolved, transformed beings. You could, the first time I went to India back in 1980, I actually had a list. Okay, here's a list of enlightened guys that I should go and meet, and which is quite extraordinary to think that you could go and knock on their door. But fortunately, the first door I knocked on was near Darjeeling, a fellow by the name of Kalu Rinpoche, very high meditation master in the Kagyu tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. And so the minute I met him, I tore up my list, and the rest is history. And again, fortunately or unfortunately, it was clear from day one that if you're going to be his student and get into the inner sanctum of his teachings, the requisite training was a 3-year, 3-month meditation retreat, which I resisted for 6 years. I managed to resist that long, and then one way or another, there I was, a very, very intensive period of time. And of course, as another great teacher said to me, "Oh, you go 3-year retreat, so much suffering, very good." So, I consider that to be kind of a karmic detox. Just sitting in your cushion by yourself with no distractions and no media and no books and nothing except you have your spiritual practices and your rituals to do. But just sitting with your own mind for that long is quite an experience. So that again altered me. And when I jumped out of there, I had already formulated the structures which have guided me ever since, what I call, among other things, elemental psychology. Sorry to all psychologists, I'm also using that name because it does borrow pieces from psychology, but it borrows, fortunately, since I started as an outsider and I'm still an outsider, I was able to borrow from all the different traditions that have no place in psychology. So religion, spirituality, shamanism, mystical experience, the subjective,
Right.
The idea of the body as a bioenergetic mechanism with transformative possibilities, which is inherent in Qigong and Tibetan Buddhism and the Gurdjieffian system, but not part of psychology for sure. You're not talking about bioenergy moving around. But how can you have a psychology? How can you change the mind? How can you change yourself, even psychologically, in terms of depression, anxiety, or any other way, unless you're working with energy? So that became as I went to chiropractic school and naturopathic and became a practitioner and began to put these things into practice, put energy healing into practice, then slowly that began to integrate with all of the other information. Actually, when I went to 3-year retreat, I'd already been in practice for some time.
Yeah, that's what I was interested in, just trying to understand the timeline or the causality in terms of when you went to India in 1980 and ended up meeting Kalu Rinpoche.
But what had you been doing before that, basically?
That's right. The other, I didn't even mention, one of the greatest events of my life, a seminal event of my life, was meeting when I was jumping around as a hippie. I had a very good friend who was a musician and so on. And he said, "Hey, do you want to meet a real master?" I said, "Yeah, this is like 1974, something like that." I said, "Yeah, I want to meet a real master. Sure, that's what I'm all about. Where's the real master?" And so he sends me to this guy in this office. And as I said, I go to this little basement of a house in the west end of Toronto. And there's a little sign on the door. What's a chiropractic? I never heard this funny word. Walked in there, and there's this roly-poly man smoking a cigarette, drinking a cup of coffee with a Snickers bar, a chocolate bar on the table. I said, "Okay, is this guy going to introduce me to the master?" But once he got me in the room and lay me down, it was very clear. Actually, he asked me, I might as well tell you the experience because it'd be entertaining for your audience. When he did his little intake, he said, "Have you ever had any surgery?" I said, "Well, I had my tonsils out when I was a kid, nothing much, I'm good health." What was I, 19 years old, 20. So then he took me into the table and he lay me down and he grabbed my feet, and I instantly felt like his body inside my body, kind of merging with my body. And I would not say I was energy sensitive or trained in any way, or I had not done Qigong, yoga, nothing like that. I was a young man with less opportunities than now. But that was a very tangible experience. I said, "Wow." And then as he worked on me, I closed my eyes and he was putting his hands over me. Oh yes, the other chief complaint, I said, "Well, the only problem is, I was constantly going like this. It was a tick I had. I was always had this tension." I said, "Well, I got this tension in my shoulder." And every 2 seconds, I was always going like this with my shoulder. Well, as he lay me down, lay back there, I had the experience of what happened to me at, what was I, maybe 4 or 5 years old, which is I had been taken to the doctor's office. I don't know why. I said, "Well, go to the doctor's office." Lay me down on the table, and the next thing I knew, there was a cloth coming down on my face. Not formaldehyde. What do you call it?
Ether.
Yeah, ether. Back then they used that kind of ether. And then I went to get up, to run away, and I was strapped down. They had strapped me down, gave me the chloroform. They gave me the chloroform, and apparently took my tonsils out. So I did not. However I recovered from that, who knows? I stayed at home and ate, oatmeal and ice cream. But here I was, age 20, much later, and I did not know that this traumatic imprint had affected me in any way. But I re-experienced this. I had never thought about it since. I didn't even know that I had the memory. But I re-experienced this horrific feeling, and especially the betrayal that my parents they didn't say a word, they had allowed this horrible thing to happen. So anyway, I just went through this it was not an emotional experience going through it. I didn't go through some, tears or anything else. I just had the visual unfolding. It's like the tape ran backwards, and there it was. And I got up, I had no tension in my shoulders, and that whole tick I had disappeared. So apparently this struggle had been imprinted in my nervous system to try to escape, and I was still in this fight and flight mechanism was still going on. So I was pretty darn impressed with that. And I said to Dr. John, as we called him, Dr. John LaPlante, of course he's passed away when I was in my 3-year retreat, but I said, "Okay, John, what do I have to do? What do I have to follow? It's like I'm your chela, I'm your disciple. You tell me whatever it is I'm going to do. Go to the ends of the earth. I want to have these capabilities, skills. I want to be enlightened." He said, "Whatever I might give you, it'll become just as mechanical as everything else you're doing. So if I give you some technique and methodology, you'll just fall asleep into that particular way of acting. It'll just become another part of your, I would say now, I would call it another part of your persona, of your mechanism, of your false self, of your conditioned self." So that made it clear to me. That was the first lesson, that awakening or being awoken can't be done mechanically. And Gurdjieff himself said, what you need to wake up is alarm clocks, except after a while, you just sleep through the alarm clock because it's just part of your regular world. So somebody has to keep changing the alarm clocks and keep waking you up. And that is the role of a spiritual master, he's going to keep hitting you between the eyes with that 2x4 and waking you up in ways that are unexpected, unusual, etc. So we can try to do that ourselves. That's why we're still not living in normality. Normally, I'm traveling at least half the year because nothing wakes me up like being in a strange place, strange language, strange situation, unusual people. I can't understand the word they sing. And I find that's very comfortable for me because it's out of the ordinary. Everything's out of the ordinary. And I'm out of my habitual tendencies. In Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, or in Tibetan, they call it bakchak, which means habitual tendency. We have all of these habitual ways of being, and we're mainly, as Laplante said, we're mainly in a robotic type of function. We're in a stimulus response function most of the time, as opposed to what he called responsibility. If you look at that word, the ability to respond consciously. And he had said to me, when I had my first conscious thought, it almost knocked me across my room, across the room. In other words, that a thought that came from his internal being rather than a stimulus response, triggering all the different mechanism, all the words and all the programs that we have within us. So functioning outside of your programming is really part of awakening. But the other thing that happened, fast forwarding, when I came out of my many difficult experiences, it was 3 retreats. People always say, "Oh, how wonderful! You're meditating." And by the way, you don't lay down for 3 years. You have a wooden box, something like this, but a higher back, and you don't lie down for 3 years. Except, there's 2 days I was sick and I did lie down, but generally you're sitting there, and basically it's a hellish experience. Not not lying down is not a hellish experience, but all the things that come up from you, from your reviewing your life, or it automatically bubbles up when you have nothing outside to distract you. That can be pretty difficult. But at the end of 3-year retreat, one of my big sayings was that I still carry with me. One day it'll be a book. Enlightenment ain't what it used to be. That's funny, right? The reason for that is because at some point in retreat, one of the epiphanies that I had, one of the satoris or waking up moments was, oh, everything I thought about awakening or enlightenment was all my self-generated projection. It was all a fantasy within my mind. It was an idea, but enlightenment is going to be something completely inconceivable, something quite different, something quite new and fresh that I had not cogitated in my mind. So that was when I gave up the idea that I had carried until then. I mean, because I was like 40. I had carried these ideas in my being, in my little brain or whatever, that this is what my goal is, and this is what enlightenment is. And at that point, I dropped that idea. I said, enlightenment, what a silly concept. It's a nice carrot on a stick to get you going, but it's kind of meaningless because, as the famous Tibetan teacher Chogyam Trungpa said, who was the first guy to really try to bring a Western flavor to those Eastern teachings of Tibet. He said, it's a journey without a goal. You're on the journey, and the journey is the most important part. And the goal, you'll probably reach a goal, or maybe you won't. Or they call it, in Zen, they call it the gateless gate. If you walk through the gate, you realize there was no gate. So you achieved what you were supposed to, but at that point you realize there's no achieving and not achieving. It is, there's a state of open dimension. So luminosity.
Yeah, so I wanted to just kind of rewind a little bit to the timeline of your own work and practice. So you met this very impressive chiropractor. So did you actually started to study with him? Is that correct?
Well, I didn't really. That's a funny thing. That's a funny apprenticeship. I decided he's a chiropractor and naturopath. That's what I'm going to become. And I did. I went to chiropractic college, and we founded together, he and I and 5 of us all together, we founded what is now the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine in its 45th year, going strong. They've got a huge facility, and they've graduated probably 10,000 students. We started that, but yes, I became a chiropractor and naturopath in order to follow in his footsteps of learning how to heal and so on. But he never once sat me down and gave me practices or even a formal teaching. But we hung out together. We played golf together. And the first time I played golf with him, it was overwhelming. I think I had to sleep for 3 days because his presence was so overwhelming, so overpowering that people like that, or like Kalu Rinpoche or the 16th Karmapa, they change you by their presence if you're open to it. It's overwhelming. I remember one day we were driving in his car, and he's driving, and he says, at some point, I had developed myself to the point where I could throw a 6-foot man across the room just with my glance. But I had to learn to calm it down. And as he's saying that, I'm feeling my body being pressed against the window of the car. I'm going, okay, I'm being crushed here. So I don't know if he was doing that on purpose or just his presence. But so we didn't have formal teachings. My girlfriend, my lady at the time, we played cards together, went up to his cottage, and there was always things said and things done that were teachings, but not in any formal sense. I never got a formal teaching. Here's how you work with energy. No, nothing like that. But he had a lot of sayings, and I made a little Facebook page for him. And sometimes I remember his sayings, and I put these little things in there. But I remember one day we were playing cards, and I said, John, because my inquisitive Jewish mind, John, what's the secret of life? I thought, now I'm going to get it. He said, keep breathing. You're alive,
That's a good answer.
So yeah, but, it was kind of a Zen internship with him. And I said, I'll never leave Toronto, which, sorry, all you Torontonians, I never liked Toronto, born and raised, but I said, I'll never leave Toronto while John is alive. And when John passed away during my 3-year retreat, after, I had basically apprenticed with him for 13, 14 years, then I decided to move to California. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. But I think the other piece that I'm just trying to tie this up before we move on is how the working with Kalu Rinpoche and the Tibetan tradition sort of wove around this chiropractic and naturopathic practice.
Well, actually, before you even get there, but I want you to go there. Was there anything between your experiences with Mr. LaPlante and Kalu Rinpoche that had a significant effect on the shape of your trajectory?
Yes, absolutely. You're quite right. You're quite intuitive. At some point, I had been in practice for, I forget how many years, 6 or 7 years, and creating a college, interacting, and homeopathy became, from day one, the minute I met LaPlante and the minute he had given me a remedy, I became very curious about these little pills. And somehow it became clear to me, actually through reading a book by Isa Schwaller de Lubavitch, Her Back, volume 1 and 2, amazing books. It became clear to me that homeopathy was onto something, as stated in Her Back, that the entire realm of nature is a living symbol. Now, symbol not meaning a representation of, but a manifestation of. The whole of nature is a manifestation of meanings. And this is mind-boggling to me, and something that still is, of course, not part of mainstream science or psychology, which is why I thumb my nose at it, because it's primitive. But becoming aware through homeopathy that every mineral, every plant, every animal, I've got some titles of books here. I was just looking at, snakes in homeopathy, spiders in homeopathy, birds in homeopathy. Every one of those is a remedy. Why? Because they not only contain, they embody, they are the manifestation of a meaning. And so when you see a patient who has some disturbance, there's a meaning behind it. There's a core value, self-identity system, and so on, trauma, but it's a meaning. And you look for the homeopathic remedy in nature that matches that meaning. So the whole of the microcosm of nature mirrors the microcosm of a human being, except in nature, it's quite normal for something to be one-sided. A dog is very doggy and a cat is very catty. But when a human being becomes doggy, that's a fixation. In nature, it's not a fixation because they're a bunch of pieces. But a human being is supposed to encompass them all. So when you see them fixated in that one calcium or phosphorus or pigeon, whatever it is, you give the homeopathic remedy as a mirror image of that archetype, and they unfixate. It's a mind-boggling science. Most homeopaths do not understand how deep homeopathy is. You have to have kind of a shamanic approach to nature. So anyway, that going forward with that and those meanings and my practice and working with energy and working with people, and I learned to, like LaPlante, be able to tune in and sense whatever's going on. And I wouldn't say whatever's going on. I learned to communicate non-verbally. So I can tune into someone and get whatever messages are coming through. I always say to patients, this is not archaeology. I'm not going to take a pickaxe and look for this trauma or that. I'll just listen. Like you're saying, you're expressing things to me by what you wear, by how you look, by how you dress, how you speak, your tone of voice, the words you say, your emotional energy. But there's other messages. So it's learning to listen to the other messages, which are very complex and very powerful, and they're nonverbal. And so I learned to listen to that in people, and I learned to listen to that in nature. So that's a nice skill to have, to understand what is normally not comprehensible by usual means. So I learned all that, but at some point, I felt that I'd reached a dead end. I couldn't go any further. I needed some spiritual connection, really. And so I'd done all this window shopping, and one day I had an office in Toronto, very nice, and I lived upstairs, and I had my office downstairs on I can't remember the name of the street right now, but so I was there one evening, and I was in kind of in the throes of my existential angst of what do I do next? What is the next direction? What do I go now? And I literally finally broke through into tears, and which means I had opened instead of having intellectual inquiry or emotional engagement. I truly opened up. And I said, please, give me an answer. Now, sometimes that's dangerous because you don't know who answers those kind of messages. I've seen bad things happen. Sometimes say, oh, give me a message. And the devil says, oh, I'll come and give you a message. But anyway, I was already kind of protected, I think. And I said, I'm really looking so hard. I'm crying, please. And I felt some energy come and descend upon me. It's quite extraordinary because I'm not into the new age stuff. I'm kind of very traditional. I'm not into whiz bangs and lights flashing and so on. So when it happens, it's significant for me. So that happened. Then 2 days later in my window shopping, there was a big event taking place. They called it a Black Crown ceremony. It was 1979, 80, that the Karmapa, one of the heads of the main lineages of Tibetan Buddhism, was in Toronto giving this ceremony where he puts on this sacred crown that's supposed to be made of the hair of 1,000 or is it 1,000,000 dakinis. Now, dakini is in Tibetan Buddhism is the embodiment of enlightened wisdom coming through the feminine beingness. The feminine being in Tibetan Buddhism is the container of the wisdom element. The male component, whether you're male or female, is the container of activity, skillful means, acting in the world, compassion. But the feminine is the wisdom of understanding the nature of things, oneself and outside. Anyway, so I went to the Black Crown ceremony, and there I was up in, I went up in the, what do you call it? The
balcony?
The loft, the balcony, to watch this thing. And, they have these Tibetans and they're playing their instruments and they're doing this whole ceremony. And then at some point, they take out this box and out comes this black crown. And he puts it on his head. And at that point, they had this, it was in an old church, but they had this fantastic light show. There was red lights and then blue lights and everything turned blue and everything turned green and so on. And then at some point I said, wow, did he do like a fast change, put on a mask? Because I saw this like a pig's face And I said, wow, this is really quite a trippy little show. And so at the end of the whole thing, then that was over, took the crown off, which is supposed to be, they call this enlightenment through seeing. They say that if you even see this ceremony happening once, you will be saved from going into a lower rebirth, and you will definitely be on the path to enlightenment just through the power of seeing. There is enlightenment through, that's where they use certain talismans and so on, enlightenment through seeing, through hearing. If you're open to it, it is such a powerful impetus that it could blast you into another level of awareness. So anyway, I said to my friend, I said, that was really a cool light show they had. He said, what light show? There was no lights. Oh yeah, right. This is the church. There's no light. I said, yeah, there's no light anyway. So I had actually witnessed the five elemental lights, which of course became a seminal part of my life, the driving force of my life, the five elements. But at that time, I had no idea what five elements were. And also this pig, there's a main meditational deity of that particular system is a red feminine wisdom being, dancing being, and out of the top of her head comes a squealing boar, a pig. So I had actually seen these manifestations, which is just an incredible blessing. It had nothing to do with my development or awareness or smartness. It's just like, wow, that blessing was so powerful. And probably through past life connections, I had a hook enough to receive the ring that came to me, hook in the ring. So then I went onto the stage. They said, oh, they're giving refuge, whatever that is. Okay, man, that's cool. Let's do refuge, which is where you officially become a Buddhist. And they, cut a little piece of your hair and you have to say tola, which means thank you, or that's cool. And so the Karmapa was a very big, burly man and a very powerful looking human being. And so as he was going around the stage, cutting people's hair, saying tola, and the Tibetans, by the way, even today, for some reason, they like to wear these big kind of army boots, or these big, cloggy, heavy leather boots, like with Doc Martin type of boots. But anyway, so as he was rushing around the stage, he stepped right on my hand, and it didn't hurt me, but I experienced. It sounds like I have these experiences all the time. I'm giving you the few experiences of my whole life, but he stepped on my hand, and I saw in my mind's eye, almost physically saw, a net, like an Indra's net, this giant network, spider's network of filaments, and this light just traveled through the whole thing, just spread through the entire web. And I realized this was a web of my lives. And Karmapa means karma means action. So Karmapa means he who produces Buddha activity, who changes things, who can make an impact in the world. And that's what he did. He changed my entire life with his foot jumping on me right there. And then you're given a Tibetan name as well. And they gave me the name Jigme Jinpa, which of course I didn't know Tibetan at the time, but that means fearless generosity, or you could say giver of fearlessness, which turned out to be very prophetic as well in light of the work that I've done in terms of Tibetan Buddhism. It involves a practice of fearlessness and generosity simultaneously. It's exactly what it is, the practice of those two. So that was life-changing right there. And so that's when I started thinking about, well, I better go to India and meet some great masters. But they did create a center there at that time in Toronto and installed a Lama there, and I started hanging out at the center. I came even to live at the center until I went off to India on my first sojourn. So yeah, that was the seminal event that shifted me began to integrate all of these ideas.